Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we are going to get into leaving the faith, which might sound a little bit controversial to some of our maybe religious listeners, and it's not. So I'm going to start with a disclaimer, as we often do. Our intent is not to disparage or to come at or, be anti-religion, anything, any type of religion. But this is an important topic because there are people who decide to leave their faith, or maybe they decide to change faiths, or they decide to grow up differently than they are raised.
So we call this leaving the faith. Maybe we misnamed this because I think it's more about how do parents let their children individuate?
Yeah.
I think that is a lot what it is, because there are many different ways. I mean, we're talking specifically about leaving the faith, but for parents as their children get older, it's hard for a lot of them to let them be anything different than the parents are. So
yeah, and it can create discord in a relationship, certainly, and it's important to navigate that because at the end of the day, Mark, you and I both believe that family matters and that family is so important. So, and even as an adult, I think that it is still important, if possible, to maintain a good relationship with your parents. And so, I think we're both big advocates for that.
No, I really believe that too. But I think the main issue, which I tell couples all the time, the equivalent for a couple is you don't marry yourself, you marry someone else. And so you will think differently about things. And the same thing is true for your children.
Yes.
And that is hard for a lot of parents as your children enter adolescence. That's when I think for most young people it starts, because one of the primary tasks of adolescence is individuation.
Yeah.
And that means that you actually have a different human being who's going to believe and think differently about certain things. And one of those things is certainly going to be faith and religion, but it could be any other issues like, do I want to go to school? So, I mean, I find this all the time with parents. Parents expect their kids to go to university, but a lot of kids don't want to do that. And honestly, nowadays you have to think, okay, what's the point to, amass this huge debt? What do you get from it? And so, I mean, it's just one other way that often children make a different decision. So for me, this is really about parents. How do you really let your children be who they are, not who you think they ought to be?
Yeah. And so, autonomy is an important emotional need for adolescents, right?
I think for all of us.
Yes.
I mean,
I
think it starts in adolescence. Yeah.
Yes, but autonomy and learning to identify their self, and that can be scary for some parents, right? I mean, especially if you raise your children in a certain belief system and they decide they want to move away from that belief system, that can be really tough.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things about the belief system or in a religion, which I think this is the reason we probably chose to name it Leaving the Faith, is that for a lot of faiths, the idea is this is the true faith, or this is the one. And, so I live in Salt Lake and you LDS, and I grew up LDS. So that's one of the faiths we can talk about. But, so they believe that. But there are many other, I mean, there are lots of religions who believe that. And that is not unique to the LDS faith. And so if you are a parent, you're in that belief system, then it really takes on a different meaning, I think, to if your child leaves that faith. Because so for a lot of religions in the LDS faith, you believe in the afterlife, right?
Yeah.
And this whole structure of what happens after death. And if a child leaves your faith, then it puts into question for that person who's a believer, it puts into question what's going to happen after. And I think that's often what drives the discord and the fear and the unhappiness for parents is they're looking down the road in eternally, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's tough.
It is, because those fears are not unjustified, and they're real, right?
Yeah.
And this isn't our way of, I mean, obviously that's what I believe in, right? I believe in afterlife, and I believe in eternal salvation and all of those things. And so, I can totally sympathize and understand why these parents are feeling this. However, I think in this instance, and again, I'm speaking from my own, I guess, religious experience, and a big core part of our religion is agency. And, it's so important to respect that.
Well, and you and I have talked about this before. I think maybe outside of our episodes of the recording, and you're one of the few really religious and devout people that I hear talk about agency, which I believe and I think is true.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, they don't necessarily believe as strongly as you do in that free agency, because I think you're right that it is a core belief in the LDS system. I don't know that that's true for other religions, but so if you really believe in that agency, then that says, your kids they might choose something else.
Right.
And because they have that agency.
Yeah. And I think another thing too that is hard for parents is, and my parents have, dealt with this before, is parents often wonder, what did I do wrong?
Right.
Which is not helpful, because it's not about you. It's important for parents to recognize and accept that when a child decides to develop a different belief system than the one they were raised in, it's not about you. It is about them.
Yes.
And it's so important to focus on that and to remember that. So that, again, this is their choice. This is their life. And as an adult, they get to make that. And your job as a parent, I honestly believe that, is to love them.
So I hope I'm not going to make this up, but I think it's true that, say, for the Amish, I believe that when their children hit a certain age, they send them away.
Yeah.
And the goal is for the child to experience life outside of that community, which is, I think I'll use the word restrictive, because I think it is, but there's a reason. They have this whole belief system. But I think they send the children away, and there's a name for it, which I don't know what that is.
I want to say it's Rumspringa, but I could be totally wrong.
Good for you to have that name. But so the goal is for you go out and you experience life in a different way, and then you make the choice. Do you want to come back? And once you come back, you're fully engaged. And so I think that at least they recognize the importance of everyone making a choice.
Yeah.
And go out and decide for yourself, essentially, is what they're saying. And so I think that when you were talking about how parents internalize that, I did something wrong.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I often use the term magical thinking, because there's magical thinking that if I do everything exactly the right way, my kids will turn out exactly the way that I want them to. No. And that's just not the case. And to me, the fascinating thing is you can have, like, I have 4 children. You can raise them all in the same household.
Yep.
And they get to a certain point and they're going off in all these different directions. And, maybe one stays in the faith, maybe one goes off. It's just they are individuals who make their own choices at some point.
Yeah. So I think there's 2 important distinctions to make too, or at least 2 different ways that this can happen. One is a little trickier, and I think that is when an adolescent who is still living at home decides they no longer believe. That is a lot trickier because, when you're still living in your parents' home and you're still a dependent on your parents, you're kind of obligated to live by their rules and their regulations. So that can definitely be trickier. Now, as an adult, it's obviously completely different. Well, I think again, that might depend, right? If you're an adult living on your own, completely independent of your parents, I think that's another important distinction to make. And then it's even more important to be completely individuated if you are married. Then it really is, right? So that's a whole other important way to individuate.
But I've certainly, over the course of my career, seen many couples who have essentially left the faith, and I'm talking about the LDS faith because that's where I live. But so they've started drinking or like drinking alcohol or drinking coffee, but they hide it from their parents. And I try to help them see that if you can't be authentic, in that relationship, then it really damages the relationship. And so, it's their fear about what's going to happen if their parents find out that they aren't living those principles that they were brought up with. And so if we go back to what you said, if the child or the adolescent is still in the home, I think there are a couple of things to consider. One would be, do you force the child to go to church? To actually attend church, which to me is different than, let's say, well, a kid is going to be underage. They shouldn't be drinking anyway. But those types of things, I think it's different. Like I believe if you're in my home and I'm paying for you, then there are certain things that you don't do while you're in the home. And even, now they're older adolescents and young adults who are still at home. And I still believe that, if you're 21 or 22 and you're legal to do all those things, if you're in my home and I'm paying for you and I don't want that in my home, I think it's okay for parents to say, you know what, you're here, and so there's no alcohol in the home.
Well, and even if you're coming to visit your parents and your parents say, I don't want alcohol in my home, right? Like maybe you're having a big get together or a big party and you're inviting all these people. I think it's reasonable to say, and my parents have certainly done this. My parents have hosted big 4th of July parties, and they have told my brothers, you're welcome to come to this party, but you are not welcome to bring alcohol. Like, don't bring your alcohol to my party. And that's reasonable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And so, and that's often hard because you might think, well, I'm an adult. But again, if you're living in someone else's home, I think you live by their standards or their expectation.
Yeah. Okay. So, sorry, real quick, the audio just changed.
Okay. Is it good or bad?
No, it's good. I think your microphone was coming from your computer because the audio.
It was.
Which is okay.
Sorry,
I mean,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I just feel like we should at least acknowledge this to listeners. Like there's this big audio shift, and that's why. So
well, because I just got this message up on the screen that said my microphone had changed, and I went and checked. And anyway, so yes, listeners, it did change. That was my fault.
but again,
because I'm a little bit incompetent, as Liz knows. When it comes to this type of stuff,
you are not a digital native.
I am not, and I've lost interest in really becoming a digital native. So I'm doing pretty well, actually.
Yeah, I would agree.
For my interest level.
Yeah, yeah. So
anyway.
That's what's with the shift in the audio.
Right.
Going back to respecting your parents. Let's take this back to, say, drinking coffee, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're adolescent, and that's more unique to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the coffee, right?
Right, I think so, yeah.
But it works in this situation, right? So your adolescent no longer believes and is no longer interested. I feel that it's totally reasonable for parents to say, while you're under my roof, you're not going to drink coffee. Like, I'm not going to supply you with a coffee pot. I'm not going to supply you with coffee. That's completely reasonable to say and to do. However, when your child leaves your house, I mean, I think that's another thing too that parents can struggle with, is they try to put more restrictions on their adolescent who is trying to individuate and who is trying to make their own decisions, which I mean, and there's nothing illegal about drinking coffee, and
Right.
you're right. And so if your teenager decides they want to start doing this, as hard as that can be for you to see as a parent, I don't know that you can control it because you can't lock them in your house forever.
No, you can't. And so when you mean, I guess you're talking about like if they go out
Yeah.
uh, and they want to stop at Starbucks, you
Yeah.
really can't control that.
No.
I agree with you. And going back, it's really allowing the child to make their own choices. And what I try and help parents understand is just because a child is thinking this way at, let's say, 17 or 18,
Yeah.
does not mean at 30 they're going to be thinking the same way, because we are dynamic through the lifespan, and the chance that, I mean, there's always a chance that the child changes, or there's going to be some sort of movement that could be back to the faith. It could,
Yeah.
which I've certainly seen, and they could go in a different direction.
Yeah.
And so it really comes down to what is hard for you as the parent to allow your child to be an individual. What is hard about that? And so I think the parents really need to think about that if my child is different from me, what's wrong with that? Or what's uncomfortable about it?
Yeah. And I think for most parents, again, it's going to be that fear of, what we talked about early on in the episode,
Right.
is this idea around our religion is, the true religion. And this is what's going to bring lasting and eternal happiness. Right. And again, I completely sympathize with parents and with that struggle. But, I think what is most important to focus on in the moment is having and maintaining a healthy relationship with your child.
Yes. Yeah.
That, because I think that is important. And, I think it's also, and one of the things that we've often talked about is validation does not have to mean I agree with you. Right. And that's going to be critical for this, is you can say, I accept your choice and I accept that this is what you're going to do. However, I don't agree with it, but I love you and I want to have a relationship with you.
Right. And I just want to mention this because I thought of it. It's not, I mean, it kind of ties into leaving the faith, but say if one of your children realizes that they're gay and then they, say that, then a lot of times for parents, especially in the religious setting, that can be very difficult. Because it has all sorts of implications for their life, for how they marry, can they marry, do they stay in faith, and things like that. So again, I really agree with you that it's about maintaining the relationship. And that's what I try and help clients who are struggling with this see, that what is more important right now in the here and now, the relationship. And so let's say that your child is doing something that in your mind really puts in question or danger their eternal life. So if you have a poor relationship with them, it doesn't change anything. I mean, that and all it does is it changes what happens right now in the here and now. And so, if you have a choice of having a good relationship and still in your belief system, they're doing something that puts at risk or danger their eternal life, I still think it's more important to focus on the here and now and have a good relationship with your kids, because that's really important. Especially if your kids, if your children partner up and have their own children. And it's my own bias. I think, grandchildren are really important, and having grandparents is really important for kids. And so if you have a strained relationship with your son or daughter just because they've made a different choice in their life, then that's problematic.
Yeah. And it's not going to create happiness for anybody.
No.
And I also think that in the beginning, I expect things to be rocky and expect it to be difficult to navigate in the beginning, and expect mistakes on both sides. I think that's another important thing, right? In terms of, your parents, if so, let's say you're the child leading the faith, and your parents are going to make mistakes. You're going to say things that maybe you don't appreciate, or right. And expect that, and learn to navigate that conflict, right? And so learn to say, I don't appreciate this comment that you made about this, and can we not say comments like that? And then as an adult parent, accept that, right?
Right, because what you're doing is which my favorite word, one of my favorites is boundaries. And through that period where you're getting to understand each other's choices, I think boundaries are important.
Yeah.
And certainly verbal comment can be hurtful and unnecessary, and so you do have to talk about boundaries. I agree. Yeah, that's a good thing to realize, that it's rocky only in the sense that you're going to be talking about and setting new boundaries that you may not have had before.
Yeah, and I like that approach to it. Is setting those boundaries can be difficult to navigate in the beginning, but it's worth it. And and they're important. And so, and I think you should also expect a breach of boundaries occasionally. And maybe it's not going to be intentional, but it's just human nature. But it doesn't mean you need to catastrophize it, and it doesn't mean it's the end of the relationship. It just means, well, we struggled with that boundary, and maybe we need some time to have some hurt feelings, and then we can come back and we can work on this and we can fix this. But I think that establishing those boundaries, it's worth it.
Yeah. And the important thing to remember is our brains do not change immediately. And it takes time. And so you have to be patient and understanding when you're both trying to make changes in your interactions.
Yeah.
And I believe that's really normal. I say that to couples all the time, is, we talk about what are the changes that need to happen. And you need to expect that it's not, that it'll be, I use the word bumpy. It'll be bumpy because, the brain just doesn't work that way. It takes time to make those changes. And so being understanding of each other, and I think you can have a sense of if the other is really trying.
Yeah.
And if it's a mistake and you forget, then that's really different. You just have to remind them of the boundary in a kind and gentle way.
Intent matters. I really believe that intent is important, and intent really matters in terms of, was I intentionally trying to be hurtful in that moment? And it doesn't mean, and if you did feel hurt, just because you didn't intend to doesn't mean that you don't get to express it, right? I think you can still say, I understand you didn't mean that, but that was still hurtful to me.
Right.
It's reasonable to do that, but I think just hold on to that intent and at least be willing to give them grace. And hopefully your parent can say, wow, I'm sorry that, or the other party can hopefully say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. And then you can repair and move on. Right.
Right.
So I think we should also talk about some of the trickier boundaries right now, because and when your teenager is living at home, the boundaries are easier to set because you're the parent and you get to set those boundaries, right? That's your job, and you get to be firm. But once you're an adult child, once you have an adult child, I think the boundaries can get trickier. And we've already kind of discussed, I think it's okay for parents to say, I don't want you to bring alcohol to my home. I don't want you to bring drugs, even like marijuana. I don't want you vaping. I don't want you smoking cigarettes. I think, but maybe one that might be a little bit trickier is cohabiting. So let's say you have an adult child living out of state, and you do not believe that couples should live together before marriage. Well, if this couple comes to visit.
Oh, that's hard.
It is hard.
Boy.
That one's really hard. I know, it's so tough.
I don't even know what
I know.
What I would say.
I know.
Usually I have an answer, but
that was really tough.
Well, okay, if you say yes, you can come to visit, but you don't get to sleep in the same room.
Okay.
Essentially that. I understand, and there's some parents do that. And I would say that's your choice. That's your right to do it. But then you can also accept that your child has made a different choice. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer there. I think it depends, probably going back to, do you want this to damage your relationship with your child?
Right.
And I think probably would have a negative effect. If you have a child who is living with a partner, out of state or even in state, doesn't, you know, and they come to visit, what do you do?
Yeah.
Don't have an answer to that.
Right.
Do you? Do you have an
No.
answer to that, one way or another?
No. I mean, okay, well,
It's not very often that we get stumped like that, is it?
I know. Well, okay, so and well, Curtis and I have already kind of faced this because obviously we believe in abstinence before marriage, but
Right.
Curtis's dad has he has a girlfriend and they don't live together, but they spend the night at each other's, he spent the night there and we've allowed her to spend the night in our house, right?
Yeah.
So we obviously, and they're sharing the same room, but to me that feels different because it's like
in what way? I'm curious.
Well, because you can't tell your dad what to do. That's why it feels different.
Okay.
Because right,
You've got a point. You've got a point.
we also allow coffee in our home, and right, and we also have alcohol in our home. Now we have set that boundary with the alcohol. It stays in his room, and we set that boundary very early on, at the very beginning. Keep it in your room and don't drink in front of the kids. And he's totally on board with that.
Okay, so here's the positive that what you're doing and what I think listeners can understand is that we're raising children in a world where people have different beliefs.
Yes.
And so I think if your grandfather, can believe something different and you can still love him, and I know he takes care of your kids in a wonderful way, often as a caretaker.
Yes.
And so I think what you're doing is you're giving your children this really wonderful experience of, I can still love and appreciate this person who has a different belief system.
Yes.
And to me, that's really valuable.
I agree.
Incredibly valuable. So,
and we have taught our children that. So, and I don't hide my faith. I don't shy away from my faith. And we've especially tried to do that in terms of, members of the LGBTQ community, right? I mean, we teach our kids our beliefs. And I don't shy away from my belief that I believe marriage should be between a man and a woman. However, as I've also expressed, I very firmly believe in agency.
Right, choice. Yeah.
Yeah, and choices. And so I teach my children, you have to respect other people's choices and you have to respect other people's decisions and their beliefs. Right? And there are people who believe that it is wrong to deny couples those rights.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you're giving your kids a valuable life lesson that will really be helpful for them. Because again, there's nothing. I think parents should be teaching their children a value system, their value system. I think that's one of the important things that parents do, whatever that is, whatever the value system is.
Yeah.
But to be able to say, essentially what you're saying, there are many ways to be happy in this world, and other people, have different ways of being happy. And that's okay. Here's our belief system. So, what you're doing with Curtis's dad, I think is really a positive thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because, we welcomed him into our home and we love having him here. I mean, it works out great for everybody. And so, yes, we teach our kids, we don't drink coffee, and he's respectful of that decision. And he never would try to offer it to our kids or persuade our kids to, well, just try it,
See, here's the other positive that you're teaching your kids. It's okay to have boundaries.
Yes. Yeah.
It's okay to have boundaries with family.
Yeah.
Which I think is often I run into clients who have very hard time setting boundaries with family because they think either they don't get to or they shouldn't. And so that is a really valuable life lesson. I can't set a boundary with someone I love, and that's okay. Is family. So there are a lot of positives from having him in your home and being able to set the boundary.
Yeah. It's worked well, and I'm not saying that it's going to be that easy for everybody, but I think it's going to be just as worth it.
Right. Yeah, it may not be as easy, and sometimes you have parents who push back, like, no, I am going to drink alcohol or whatever, but it goes back to he is staying in your home.
Yes.
And so in your home and he's respecting your values. It
Yeah.
sounds to me like what he's doing.
Yes. I mean, well, right. He does. And I mean, because he has never drank in front of the kids. He only does it, once our kids are in bed, and it stays in his bedroom, right? So like that's his space. So I think that another thing that we can address, and this kind of ties in twofold, both why parents struggle with this, right, with this idea of letting their cohabiting child with their partner staying in the same room, is it feels like they are condoning sinful behavior, which, again, I can sympathize with that. And that's also why I feel like I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah.
Is, because right, because that's a real and valid feeling. But again, it's the relationship. And so, Curtis and I have found a way. And I guess, again, I think for Curtis and I, why it feels different is because it's different trying to tell your dad what to do versus your child. I mean, so that's why it feels different. But, again, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think that, parents, they need to consider their relationship with their child. I mean, and I think where it gets even more complicated is if you have a same-sex couple, like if one of your child is the same sex, well, then how do you navigate that, especially if they're married, right?
And so, I mean, I had this experience with a couple of my kids because, for instance, Adrian and Jake were living together many years before they got married, but there was always this commitment. And so, same with Caitlin and Chase. And so it was more the idea. So for me, and I've talked about this before, it's not necessarily the marriage, it's the commitment that is important.
Yeah.
And certainly the research bears that out. But I understand that for some people in a religious setting, it's not that the marriage is actually an important part of it. So again, it's a moral decision that you have. But having, lived through that, what was more important to me was the commitment.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I would have felt the same if there was a whole string of relationships that were coming into my home. I mean, it was never that way. Like if every few months there's someone different. I don't know that I'd feel good about that.
Yeah.
But I honestly I don't know because I never had that experience.
Right. And you're talking about like spending nights, right? I mean, because it's different if you have an adolescent dating and just like casually dating and bringing different, like almost like bringing, oh, this is my boyfriend that I'm dating right now, and bringing them to the home.
I think to me that feels different.
Yeah,
it does feel different.
Yeah, but if they're staying the night, or if they're, I don't know, having sex in your house or something like that, that's a lot different.
Right. But again, it's different than having, say, 30-year-old kids who are in a committed relationship. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Right.
It's to me, the commitment is more important. But I realize that's not going to be true for everybody.
And well, I guess so. Another thing that Curtis and I had to navigate, so his sister, who is not a member of our faith, was coming from out of town with her boyfriend. And, and we made that decision that we were going to allow her and her boyfriend because we didn't want to alienate them or make them feel unwelcome or make them feel weird. So, again, for us, we wanted to have a good relationship, and the relationship was important. So we allowed her and her boyfriend, who were committed. So it's not like, because I think it would be different if it's like, oh, I just started dating this guy 2 weeks ago. Can he come stay in your home? No, I'm not going to allow some stranger into my home with my children. But this guy that you have been committed to for years, yes, he's welcome in our home as part of the family.
And so I think that I like to have takeaways. And to me, here's one of the takeaways is that in all these situations, whether you're talking about parents with adolescents in their home or parents and, older children come back, if you can certainly have this moral code that you live by.
Yeah.
But for me, and I think for you, what I'm hearing is the relationships are really important.
Yes.
And so, yes, you can have a belief system, but if if your belief system is strongly that it's all about relationship, which I think you and I are pretty similar about that, then you end up making different choices.
Yeah.
Because it's better for the relationship. And that's what I'm hearing you say about these choices. And I agree with that relationships are more important. That's what I try and help couples with, with extended family and also with their own children.
Yeah.
The relationship is more important.
And I'm not quite there yet. My own children.
But you will be.
Yeah, well, it's
You're about
coming.
5 years off, maybe.
Oh, if that. I mean, well, because, my oldest is 11.
Okay.
And so she's
about 16. That's when it starts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and she's right now, we still have a lot of control over the lives of our children. And so they don't get a choice. They go to church with us because that's what we do. And so that's something that we'll have to navigate. Okay. So the last thing that I want to briefly talk about is avoiding being judgmental, right? Which can be so hard, but I think is so important because I think it's and I think this needs to go both ways, is I think parents need to avoid being judgmental, because I think it can be easy to look down at your child and say, well, you're not living the lifestyle you were brought up in, so that's why you're unhappy and that's why your life isn't going so well. That's not helpful.
No, it's not helpful, but I think there are two parts to that. Yeah. One is you will have those thoughts.
Yes.
Because you can't stop those thoughts.
Yeah.
But as I've said before, I think good relationships, either if you're in a marriage or a long-term relationship or parents and child, good relationships have a lot of self-censorship.
Yes.
Meaning just because you think something does not mean you should say it.
And even if you feel it, even if you believe it, it's okay if you believe it.
Yeah, you can believe it, but it doesn't mean you say it because I think it goes back to the importance of the relationship because if you say something that's going to damage the relationship, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
There is no point.
Yeah.
Like if I say to my child, you're unhappy because you aren't living the faith. I mean, this doesn't change anything for them. They're still going to make the choices. It's not like they're going to say, "Oh, you're right, Mom, Dad. I'm going to suddenly come back and start living the way you want me to." That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so all you're doing by making the comment, you're not improving the situation. You're damaging the situation.
Yeah.
So self-censorship is okay.
Yeah. And then I also think too, for the adult child, I think it's important not to assume that your parent is judging you, because I think it can be easy to do that, right?
Yeah. And I agree with that. Yeah.
And so again, relationships take two, and as we said early on, when you're learning and establishing these boundaries, it's going to be rocky.
Yeah.
And and that's okay. Navigate, push through, because eventually you guys are going to figure it out and you're going to be able to learn to have a healthy, good relationship.
Yep.
Okay.
Good takeaways.
Yes. Good takeaways. And I think the takeaway is both, it's something that we both believe in very, very firmly. And that's that family really matters, and families
matter. Relationships matter.
Yeah. They are so important. They're important to our happiness, to our mental well-being, and they're important to your longevity. We know this and we believe this. So
all of it. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Next week, we are going to get into empathetic disagreements. So Mark and I are going to do something we almost never do. We're going to get a little political.
Well, we're going to talk about some controversial subjects and be able to have a good discussion about it.
Yeah, we're going to
a civil discussion.
Yes, so we're going to disagree with each other, and I think it's important, especially in this day and age, to learn how to have a discussion. And it's interesting. Once upon a time when I was in high school, I used to love debating. It's like, I'll take any position just so I can debate them. Now as an adult, I don't like debating.
Yeah.
No, thank you. But I love having discussions. I love open and honest discussions because I think they're important.
So we're going to do that next week.
We are. It's going to be a really good episode.
Okay.
All right. We will see you all next week. Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.